The keys to the house I'd bought for us dangled from her hand as she climbed into a stranger's car, right there in front of my stunned family. "He'll give me the life you can't, Ethan," Brenda said, her voice a cruel whisper that echoed in the quiet street, leaving me frozen, watching her vanish. The sharp clang of metal against brick cut through the crisp autumn air. I watched as the excavator's steel jaw ripped into the side of what had once been Brenda Miller's home. Plaster dust bloomed like a pale cloud, hanging briefly before settling over the twisted rebar and shattered timber. A window frame, still intact, dangled precariously for a moment, then dropped, bouncing once before its glass burst, scattering like a handful of cheap pearls. I stood on the curb, the lukewarm coffee mug a familiar weight in my hand, feeling nothing. Not a pang, not a flicker of sentiment for the place where we had once laid out plans for a life together. The house in its dying moments was just a structure, no longer a vessel for ghost memories. Clara Peterson stood beside me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her practical canvas jacket. She was always observant, always saw past the immediate surface. The sound of crumbling wood filled the silence between us. She shifted her weight, then spoke, her voice level against the drone of the machinery. "Is this revenge or justice, Ethan?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter warmth a mild comfort. The question hung in the air, framed by the falling debris. I considered it, my gaze fixed on the excavator's relentless work. "Neither," I replied, the word feeling flat, final. "It's transformation." The machine groaned, biting deeper into the foundation. 3 weeks earlier, Brenda had swept into my office at Horizon Developments like a storm of expensive perfume and forced elegance. 8 years had passed since she'd left, but the scent of her, a cloying floral, still had a way of cutting through the sterile air of my executive suite. She wore a tailored suit, the fabric fine, but there was a tightness around her eyes, a subtle tremor in her manicured hand as she smoothed her hair. Desperation, I noted, could be dressed up, but it rarely disappeared. She wasn't alone. Trailing behind her, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else, was her second husband. He was a nervous man, all fidgeting fingers and averted eyes, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He offered a weak nod, then stared intently at the framed architectural renderings on my wall, avoiding my gaze. They were here for financial salvation. I knew it before she even spoke. Brenda settled into the leather chair opposite my desk, crossing her legs with a practiced grace. Her smile was too bright, too wide. "We need your help, Ethan," she began, her voice honeyed, a familiar tone from a forgotten past. "Just a small loan, $300,000 for medical bills." She spoke the sum as if it were pocket change, her eyes trying to hold mine, searching for the ghost of the man she had discarded. I remembered her shock, the sudden draining of color from her face as I reached for a thick manila folder on my desk and slid it across the polished wood. The gesture was deliberate, the sound of it sliding against the surface crisp and final. Her husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze finally snapping back to us, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "I bought your mortgage, Brenda," I said, my voice calm, the words precise and unhurried. Each phrase landed with the weight of a stone. "And your credit card debt, and your tax liens." The victory tasted clean, sharp, like cold steel on my tongue. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The expensive perfume suddenly seemed thinner, unable to mask the scent of impending ruin. I let the words hang, watching the realization dawn on her face, a slow, horrifying understanding. "The house will be demolished next month." I paused, letting that sink in before continuing, my voice still even. "It's for affordable housing, for people rebuilding their lives after catastrophe." The irony I knew was not lost on her, or on me. Now, watching the final walls give way, a plume of dust rising like a defeated sigh, I felt the last threads connecting me to that past dissolve. The noise of the demolition was a cleansing roar, washing away the echoes of old plans and bitter memories. What Brenda never truly understood was that her cruelest act, her definitive rejection, had inadvertently been my greatest gift. It had stripped away illusions and forged me into something unburdened, something stronger. The day everything changed began like any other Sunday afternoon road trip argument. The flat, endless expanse of Iowa farmland stretched out on either side of the highway, a monotonous blur of green and brown that did little to soothe the tension inside the car. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only steady rhythm. "You missed the turn again, Ethan," Brenda sighed, the sound thin and sharp, slicing through the quiet cabin. Her manicured fingers, each nail perfectly buffed, tapped an impatient rhythm against the armrest of the passenger door. Her tone carried the familiar weight of 4 years of marriage, a subtle accusation that I still couldn't remember the way to the Miller family's house, despite the annual pilgrimages. It was a route that had always seemed to shift, just slightly, in my memory. We just spent a tense weekend at their sprawling farmstead, a weekend filled with the usual polite smiles and subtle criticisms that felt more like surgical strikes. Brenda's father, a man whose success in farming was matched only by his stern demeanor, had asked pointed questions about my little construction business, his eyes narrowing as if searching for cracks in my ambition. He'd made it clear that little was not a term he associated with prosperity or with a suitable son-in-law. My answers, earnest and hopeful, seemed to fall flat, echoing in the cavernous, high-ceilinged living room. Brenda had remained silent, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window, betraying nothing. "We need gas anyway," I said, trying to inject a note of practicality into the stale air. My eyes scanned the horizon, spotting a faded brown sign by the roadside. "Pinewood Rest Stop, next exit." It was a familiar landmark, though I hadn't stopped there in years. It sounded like an escape, however brief, from the enclosed space of the car. As I signaled for the exit, I caught a subtle change in Brenda's posture. Her shoulders, usually held so rigidly, seemed to slump almost imperceptibly, and I thought I detected a quickening of her breath, a fleeting anxiety that I dismissed as the usual post-family visit exhaustion. The rest stop was exactly as I remembered it, decrepit, frozen in time, bathed in the harsh afternoon sun. Rusted gas pumps stood like ancient sentinels beside a small, unkempt building that housed a convenience store and restrooms. The paint on the sign above the door was peeling, revealing layers of forgotten colors. The asphalt in the parking lot was cracked, weeds sprouting defiantly through the fissures. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, then stop altogether. We pulled up to a pump, the engine sighing as I turned it off. The sudden silence was thick, oppressive. "I need to use the restroom," Brenda announced, her voice a little too loud in the stillness. She grabbed her purse, a stylish leather bag that seemed out of place in this dusty tableau. "And maybe something cold to drink." "Sure," I nodded, grateful for the momentary solitude. Our marriage had become a performance, a carefully choreographed dance of expectations and unmet needs, and any break in the routine was a small mercy. I pumped the gas, the smell of petroleum sharp in the air, then headed inside to pay. The attendant was a man of indeterminate age, slumped behind a counter, his face illuminated by the flickering, static-filled screen of a tiny portable television set. He barely glanced up as I paid for the bait and grabbed 2 bottles of water. His eyes were fixed on the fuzzy images, lost in some distant, forgotten drama. The transaction was swift, impersonal, and I appreciated the lack of forced small talk. Stepping back out into the harsh sunlight, I scanned the lot for Brenda. The restrooms were on the far side of the building. My eyes drifted towards our dark blue sedan. That's when I saw her. She was by the open trunk, her back to me, her shoulders hunched. She was pulling something out, something that looked like a small, soft-sided suitcase or a duffel bag, setting it on the ground beside the car. It struck me as odd. We had packed everything that morning. "Everything okay?" I called out, my voice cutting across the quiet hum of distant highway traffic. She turned, startled, her head snapping around. Her eyes, wide with surprise, met mine across the short distance. For a split second, I saw raw panic, a flash of something desperate. Then, like a shutter closing, her expression shifted. It smoothed over, hardening, settling into a look of cold, unsettling calculation that I had never seen directed at me before. The sun caught the curve of her jaw, highlighting a sharpness that was suddenly alien. "I was hoping to be gone before you came out," she said, her voice chillingly detached, utterly devoid of emotion. It was an observation, not an apology, delivered with a strange, clinical precision. would have been cleaner. A chill ran down my spine, a cold knot forming in my gut despite the warmth of the sun. The air suddenly felt thinner, colder. The innocuous landscape of the rest stop twisted into something sinister. My throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, the words feeling clumsy, inadequate, in the face of her strange, unwavering gaze. "You know what your problem is, Ethan?" Brenda said, her voice now dangerously calm, stripped of any residual warmth. She twirled the car keys around her finger, the small compass keychain glinting in the afternoon sun, a mocking symbol of direction in a moment of utter disorientation. "You're too comfortable with mediocrity, too accepting of limitations." Her eyes, usually so expressive, were flat, unreadable. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, cold and precise. I need someone who pushes boundaries, not someone who builds fences around them. The truth of what she was doing, what she was about to do, began to crystallize in my mind, a horrifying revelation. My breath hitched in my throat, words failing me. My feet felt glued to the cracked asphalt. "Brenda, what are you doing?" The question was a hoarse whisper, barely audible. She offered a tight, humorless smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Teaching you self-reliance." With that, she swung the driver's side door open and slid into the seat, the expensive leather creaking softly under her weight. "Don't worry," she added, almost as an afterthought. "I left you something." She nodded towards the windshield. My eyes darted to the car. Tucked under the wiper blade, a white envelope stood out against the dark glass. I moved forward mechanically, my hands shaking as I snatched it. Inside, I found not a letter, not a note, but a handful of wrinkled bills, 2 20s, 3 10s, and a scattering of 5s and 1s. 80, my heart hammered against my ribs. "This isn't funny." My voice finally found its volume, raw with rising panic. We were at least 50 miles from our house, smack in the middle of nowhere, with cell service that was notoriously spotty at best. The thought of checking my phone for a signal, for proof of connection, only tightened the knot in my stomach. My phone, my wallet, my laptop, all were still in the car, nestled in my duffel bag in the back seat. Brenda met my gaze through the open window. Her expression was utterly devoid of remorse. "It's not meant to be funny, Ethan," she said, her voice like ice. "It's meant to be illuminating." Her hand reached for the ignition. The engine turned over with a low rumble, a sound that suddenly felt menacing. "Let's see what you're really made of when everything is stripped away." Before I could formulate another word, before I could beg or plead or even just curse, she pressed a button. The window hummed closed with an unnerving smoothness, separating us, sealing her inside the comfortable, familiar interior of our sedan. I pressed my face against the glass, the faint reflection of my own bewildered face staring back. Through the tinted pane, I watched her lips move, forming words I could only strain to read. "I'll be watching the clock. See how long it takes you to find your way home." Then she was gone. The car backed out of the space, turned sharply, and sped down the access road, kicking up a small cloud of dust that momentarily obscured my view. In seconds, it vanished around the bend, leaving me standing alone in the desolate parking lot. I was left with 2 bottles of water, 80 in crumpled cash, and a slow, creeping horror that settled deep in my bones. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. The only sound was the distant hum of the highway, a constant reminder of the world that continued without me. My phone, my wallet, my laptop, everything was in that car. Everything that connected me to my life, to my identity. I was stranded. Utterly, completely. Just then the gas station attendant, the same man who had been engrossed in his static-filled TV, emerged from the convenience store. He was lighting a cigarette, the flare of the match a brief, bright orange in the dull light. He took a long drag, then exhaled slowly, a thin stream of smoke curling into the air. He glanced at me, his eyes assessing my stunned posture, my slack jaw. "Trouble with the missus?" he drawled, his voice flat, devoid of real curiosity. It was a common enough sight, I supposed, in places like this. I couldn't answer him. My tongue felt thick, my throat constricted. All I could do was stare at the empty spot where our car had been. He took another drag, then gestured with his cigarette toward the back of the building. Payphone's around back, he offered, his gaze still holding mine. 25 cents a call. 25 cents. I clutched the crumpled bills in my hand, the meager sum suddenly feeling like a lifeline. My legs, stiff and unresponsive moments before, now moved with a desperate urgency. I stumbled around to the back of the decrepit building, past overflowing dumpsters and forgotten machinery, until I found it, a relic from another era, its blue paint faded, the handset grimy. I fumbled for a quarter, my mind racing, trying to recall any number, any contact. In that moment of absolute panic and abandonment, only one number came to mind, clear and sharp through the haze of shock: Clara Peterson's. My hand, trembling slightly, inserted the quarter into the slot of the payphone. The coin dropped with a tinny clang, echoing the emptiness in my chest. I punched Clara's number, each digit a desperate plea for connection. The rings were long, drawn out, stretching the silence of the rest stop. On the fourth ring, her voice, a little breathless, answered, "Hello? Clara, it's Ethan. I need help." My voice was raw, unfamiliar even to me. There was a beat of silence on the other end, a moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. Then her response, immediate and chillingly perceptive. What did she do? The question cut through the fog of my shock, a clear, sharp indictment of Brenda's character. It meant Clara had always known, always suspected, something like this was possible. She left me, I managed to articulate, the words tasting bitter. At Pinewood Rest Stop. Took the car, my wallet, everything. The details spilled out, fragmented and desperate. Clara's sigh crackled through the ancient phone line, a sound heavy with resignation and weary understanding. Where exactly are you, Ethan? Give me the cross streets. Cross. I'll come get you. Her voice, though laden with sadness, held a familiar strength, a steady anchor in my sudden storm. As I fumbled to describe my location, pointing out the faded sign, the rusted pumps, the full reality of Brenda's act penetrated the last vestiges of my disbelief. This wasn't a prank, not a cruel joke meant to teach a lesson. This was something far colder, far more calculated. Brenda hadn't just left me, she had seen me as an experiment, a specimen to be tested, dissected, and ultimately discarded. The thought was like a shard of ice in my gut. While I waited, the sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the parking lot. I tried calling home, thinking perhaps there was a mistake, a twisted misunderstanding. No answer. I tried my office, hoping to find a familiar voice, a connection to the life I still imagined I had. It was a Sunday. The office was closed. The silence of the unanswered calls echoed Brenda's final chilling words. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing minute. 2 hours and 43 minutes later, a faded blue pickup truck, its paint dulled by years of sun and farm dust, shimmered into view down the access road. It was Clara's. Relief, raw and overwhelming, washed over me, threatening to buckle my knees. She pulled up right beside me, the engine rumbling to a stop. Clara killed the engine, then killed the lights, plunging the immediate area into a softer twilight. She took one look at my face, my eyes probably wide and lost, my shoulders slumped with the weight of it all. Without a word, she opened her arms. I hadn't cried yet, not truly. The shock had held me rigid, a brittle shell. But in her embrace, warm and smelling faintly of earth and old books, something inside me fractured. A sharp physical pain shot through my chest, and the dam broke. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," Clara whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder. She stroked my hair, a gesture of comfort I hadn't realized I craved. "I should have been more direct, made you understand." I pulled back, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, my voice rough. "Did you know she would do something like this?" The question hung between us, heavy and accusatory. Clara's warm brown eyes, usually full of gentle humor, were sad now, but unflinching. She didn't look away. "Not specifically this," she admitted, her gaze steady. "But Brenda has always treated people like experiments. She probes, she pushes, she watches to see what will break and what will hold." She paused, then added, her voice dropping to a low, confiding tone. "I remember when she was 14. She abandoned Mom at the mall in the middle of Christmas shopping. Just to see what would happen, she said later. To see how long it would take Mom to find her way home, to see if anyone would help. A shiver ran down my spine, a deeper understanding of Brenda's coldness. The interior of Clara's truck smelled of cinnamon and dog fur, a comforting blend of home and practicality. The air inside felt safe, a stark contrast to the desolate parking lot. As she started the engine, pulling away from the wine station that had become my personal purgatory, I finally asked the question that had been churning in my mind, the one that truly mattered now. My voice was quiet, a little hoarse from crying. What happens now? Clara kept her eyes fixed on the road, the faded yellow lines stretching endlessly before us, illuminated by the truck's headlights. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. That depends, she said, her voice steady, pulling me from my dazed introspection. Do you want to go home and wait for her to finish her experiment? She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Or do you want to start fresh? I stared out the window at the endless fields, now swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The silhouettes of distant farmhouses flickered past, each one a stark reminder of a life I'd thought I had, a life that felt impossibly far away. The thought of returning, of facing Brenda's cold, analytical gaze, of being a pawn in her game, made my stomach clench. I don't think I can go back, I said, the words catching in my throat, raw and painful. Not after this. The admission was both terrifying and liberating. Clara nodded, a grim but resolute motion. Then we start with tonight. You can stay with me. Tomorrow, we figure out the next step. Her offer was simple, unconditional, a lifeline in a suddenly uncharted ocean. As evening deepened into night, and Clara drove me to her small, tidy farmhouse, a strange realization settled over me. Brenda had been right in a way. She had taught me resilience. But it wasn't the lesson she intended. I hadn't learned about finding my way home to her. Instead, I'd learned when a home wasn't worth returning to at all. The home I had shared with Brenda was gone, not just physically, but metaphorically, dissolved into dust and bitterness. 3 days later, I was at a local bank, the polished marble counters and hushed tones a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. With Clara's quiet support, her subtle network of local connections, and her steadfast presence beside me, I was establishing a temporary account. She knew the names, the right people to talk to. Her recommendation carried weight. It helped me secure a small, low-interest loan, just enough to get started, to build something from the ashes. It was a humble beginning, but it was mine. I found a tiny, affordable apartment in a neighboring town, a place far enough from my old life and the Miller family's influence. It was barely more than a bedroom and a cramped kitchen, but it had a lock on the door and a window that overlooked a quiet street. It felt like a sanctuary. I started a small, independent construction and odd job business, working longer hours than I ever had, picking up whatever came my way, repairing fences, painting houses, fixing leaky roofs. My hands, once accustomed to the soft touch of blueprints and proposals, now knew the rough feel of lumber and the bite of a hammer. Clara became my anchor through those first turbulent months. She offered practical advice about local suppliers, shared her grandmother's recipes for hearty stews, and listened patiently to my frustrations over lukewarm coffee. She never preached, never judged, just offered a steady presence, a quiet strength that kept me from drifting. I consciously avoided any news of Brenda or the Miller family. The past was a closed book, its pages turned and sealed. My focus was entirely on rebuilding myself, piece by painstaking piece. The memory of Pinewood, of standing alone and discarded, didn't fade. Instead, it transformed, evolving from a raw wound of anger into a quiet, relentless determination. Every nail hammered, every board cut, every dollar earned was a small, hard-won victory. I learned to budget, to save, to work smarter, not just harder. The satisfaction I found in honest labor was a revelation, a genuine feeling of accomplishment that had been lost in the performance of my old marriage. It was a satisfaction that no expensive suit or grand plan could ever replicate. Life's choices can be costly, shaping us in ways we never foresee. Stick around to the end to see how these choices unfold and what price each character ultimately pays. Months turned into a year, then two, then five. The small, independent construction and odd job business I'd started, initially just Ethan's Fix-Its, evolved slowly but steadily. It became Hayes Restorations, a name that reflected not just the work I did on houses, but the quiet rebuilding I was doing of myself. I gained a reputation in the regional community for reliability, for quality work that stood the test of time, and for prices that were fair, perhaps even a little on the generous side. People trusted me. They saw the honest effort, the meticulous attention to detail. I was a different man now, leaner, sharper, my movements more deliberate, my gaze more direct. The quiet confidence that had been absent in my earlier life, suffocated by Brenda's expectations and criticisms, had begun to bloom, rooted in hard work and self-sufficiency. Clara remained a constant, steady presence. Her kitchen, always smelling faintly of cinnamon and something baking, was a sanctuary. Our friendship deepened into something unspoken but profound, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. She rarely asked directly about Brenda, but snippets of news, whispered rumors, found their way to me through Clara's network of small-town connections. Brenda's lavish lifestyle, the expensive clothes, the exotic vacations, all part of an increasingly desperate struggle to keep up appearances. I learned that Brenda had indeed married a wealthy older man, just as she had always intended. But the wealth, it turned out, was more show than substance, built on a foundation of debt and risky investments. The glitter, I gathered, was starting to chip. Armed with my growing experience in construction and a newfound understanding of financial leverage, I began to invest strategically. My business expanded, no longer content with just restoring old homes. It moved into property development, taking on a new name, Horizon Developments. The name felt right, reflecting the endless possibilities I now saw stretching before me. I maintained a low profile, deliberately staying out of the social circles Brenda would frequent, careful not to attract any unnecessary attention. My rise was quiet, methodical, invisible to those who weren't looking. I started buying up distressed properties, parcels of land on the edge of town, and even debt, small mortgages, lingering liens. Each acquisition was a brick in the empire I was meticulously building, brick by patient brick. The old house, the one I had bought for Brenda and me, the one she had abandoned me from, became an abstract target in my financial planning. It was a property, nothing more, an asset to be acquired, a line item on a spreadsheet. I monitored Brenda and her husband's escalating financial woes from a distance, through public records and quiet channels. It wasn't a malicious tracking, not fueled by spite. The satisfaction I felt wasn't in their misfortune, but in the slow, inevitable unfolding of my own success, a powerful counter-narrative to her experiment at Pinewood. I was proving her wrong not through words or confrontation, but through the quiet, undeniable force of my own transformation. Clara, who saw everything with her clear, observant eyes, understood my quiet drive. Occasionally, she'd ask, a gentle smile playing on her lips, "Are you still watching the clock, Ethan?" It was a subtle nod to Brenda's cruel parting words, a shared understanding of the long game I was playing. I would smile back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Oh, I'm watching and planning." I never forgot the feeling of being abandoned at that rest stop. The sting of it, the coldness of her act remained a part of me, but it no longer defined me. It had not broken me. Instead, it had forged me, tempered me into something stronger, something capable of building a new horizon. The call came on a Tuesday morning, a nervous assistant from her husband's office requesting a meeting on behalf of Mrs. Miller. The voice on the other end was tight, clearly under duress. I knew the time was ripe. The rumors Clara had picked up, combined with the public records I'd quietly tracked, confirmed it. Brenda was desperate, and her husband was facing serious, undeniable financial trouble. The experiment was coming to its conclusion. I arranged the meeting at my sleek, modern Horizon Developments office. It was a space designed to project strength and stability, all clean lines, polished chrome, and expansive views of the city skyline. A stark, intentional contrast to the image of my little construction business Brenda had once scorned. The massive, dark wood desk I sat behind, was an imposing barrier, a physical representation of the distance I had traveled. Brenda entered, trailing her signature expensive perfume. It was still a familiar scent, but now it seemed thinner, struggling to mask a faint, almost imperceptible scent of fear that I could detect beneath the layers of carefully applied artifice. She was older, of course, the years etched subtly around her eyes, the perfect features showing the strain of maintaining an illusion. The practiced sincerity in her smile was wearing thin, stretched too taut, revealing the effort beneath. Her husband, the nervous, sweating man from the rest stop, followed her in. He sat silently in the chair I indicated, fidgeting with his tie, his gaze stubbornly fixed on a point just beyond my left ear, avoiding any direct eye contact. He offered a weak, almost apologetic nod, then retreated into himself, a shadow in his wife's more dramatic performance. Brenda launched into her plea, a carefully crafted narrative of medical emergencies, unexpected market downturns, and temporary setbacks. Her voice was honeyed, almost hypnotic, recounting a tale of victimhood and unfortunate circumstances, all designed to elicit sympathy and, more importantly, a lifeline. She spoke of an ailing parent, a sudden, debilitating illness, the kind of story that would tug at the heartstrings of a lesser man. She was good, I had to admit. Her performance was almost flawless. I listened patiently, my expression neutral, betraying nothing. I sat behind my imposing desk, a phantom of the man she had abandoned at Pinewood, observing the woman who had once held my entire world in her hands. The contrast between that moment and this was almost surreal. I let her finish, allowing her to exhaust every carefully rehearsed line, every calculated pause. Then when the silence finally settled, thick and heavy, I reached for a thick manila folder I had placed discreetly to my side. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk, the sound soft but resonant in the hushed office. Inside were detailed printouts of her current mortgage, credit card statements, and the recent tax liens I had acquired. Every single one. Her perfect features, so carefully composed moments before it began to contort. First confusion, then dawning horror. Her eyes darted from the documents to my face, then back again. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking, stripped of its practiced composure. "I bought it all, Brenda," I stated, my voice calm, flat, utterly devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact, a declaration of ownership. Your house, your debt, all of it. The words felt clean, final. I watched as the color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty white. The faint scent of fear I had detected earlier now became more pronounced. "The house," I continued, my gaze steady, "will be demolished next month to make way for affordable housing." Her husband, who had remained silent throughout Brenda's performance, finally made a sound, a choked gasp of understanding that cut through the silence. His head snapped up, his eyes, wide with panic, met mine for a fleeting second, finally recognizing the depth of their predicament. Brenda pushed herself up from the chair, her hands gripping the edge of my desk, her knuckles white. Her face was a mask of disbelief, rapidly contorting into rage. "You did this?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You ruined us?" I leaned forward slightly, my gaze unwavering. "You taught me self-reliance, Brenda," I said, my voice still even, betraying no satisfaction, no triumph, only a cold, hard truth. "And how to invest wisely. Consider this the final lesson." Brenda's eyes blazed, a mixture of hatred and chilling recognition in their depths. The mask of desperation shattered, revealing the raw fury beneath. "You set me up!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet office. "This was always your plan." I leaned back in my chair, unimpressed by her theatrics. Her accusations felt hollow, powerless against the edifice I had built. "My plan was to survive, Brenda," I stated, my voice level, cutting through her rage. "Your actions created the opportunities." It was the simple truth, stripped bare. Her decisions had led her here, not mine. Her husband, pale and visibly shaken, finally found his voice. "Brenda, calm down, please," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously between us, desperate to de-escalate. She rounded on him, her anger a tangible force. "Calm down? He's taking everything. Your business, our home." The accusation was flung, not just at me, but at the world that seemed to be collapsing around them. The meeting devolved quickly. Her desperate pleas, once carefully constructed, now crumbled into bitter accusations, flung like stones. She called me heartless, a monster, every name she could conjure in her panic. I listened, my face impassive, letting the words wash over me without penetration. When her tirade finally subsided, leaving her breathless and shaking, I quietly explained the process, the legalities of the foreclosure, the specifics of the upcoming demolition. My voice was calm, factual, leaving no room for argument or appeal. I reiterated my vision for the property, housing for those rebuilding, for people who understood what it meant to start over, a stark contrast to the empty opulence they had chased. The land would serve a purpose, a true foundation for new beginnings, not just a facade. She tried to appeal to our shared history, to the memories of our past, twisting them into a plea for mercy. Her voice softened, tempting to conjure a ghost of the affection we once shared. But the memories were barren, poisoned by betrayal. I felt nothing. That past ended at Pinewood, Brenda, I said, my voice cutting through her manufactured sentimentality. You wrote the ending. The words hung in the air, a definitive finality. There was no going back, no rewriting that chapter. They left my office, defeated. Her husband's shoulders were slumped, his face a roadmap of resignation. Brenda's parting glare was venomous, a burning hatred, but it felt hollow, lacking the power it once held over me. It was the impotent rage of a trapped animal. Word spread quickly through our old social circles, the tight-knit community of this Midwestern town. The Miller family, once so critical of my modest ambitions, was now quiet, embarrassed, their carefully cultivated reputation tarnished by Brenda's public downfall. I faced whispers, some calling it cruel revenge, others justice. I cared little for either. Their opinions were irrelevant. I felt no desire to gloat, no urge to bask in their misfortune. Instead, there was just a profound sense of completion, like closing a book after a long, arduous read. The chapter was finally closed. The story told. Later that afternoon, Clara came to my office. She didn't need to ask for details. Her quiet understanding was evident in her eyes. She just stood by the large window, looking out at the city spread below us, then turned to me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, imbued with genuine concern. I met her gaze, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. I looked out at the bustling city, the buildings I had helped construct, the horizons I had built. "Yeah, Clara," I said, "I'm okay. More than okay." The weight was finally lifted. Back in the present, I watched the final stubborn beams of what was once Brenda's house collapse with a sigh of splintering wood and grinding metal. The dust, thick and white, billowed, then slowly settled, revealing an empty lot, a blank slate, ready for new foundations. Clara stood by my side, her presence a quiet strength, a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage of my past. I reflected on the journey, from a discarded husband at a forgotten rest stop to a successful developer, standing on the edge of a new horizon. The years of hard work, the sacrifices, the lessons learned about true worth, it all converged in this moment. The revenge, if one could call it that, had been secondary. The transformation, that was everything. I had built not just a business, but a life rooted in integrity and purpose, something Brenda never valued, never understood. The affordable housing project would begin soon, a tangible symbol of my commitment to rebuilding for others. I looked at Clara, a slow, genuine smile growing on my face. Our relationship, like the steady growth of my business, had steadily, gently bloomed. I took her hand, my fingers wrapping around hers, a comfortable, familiar fit. "Ready to see what we build next, Clara?" She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with an unspoken understanding. "Always, Ethan." The crisp autumn air felt clean, not cold, a breath of new possibility. The past was truly behind me, not forgotten, but no longer a burden. I had paid the price of my old naivety, and now I was paying it forward, transforming destruction into opportunity. The moral lessons of abandonment, betrayal, and self-reliance had shaped me into a man of quiet, unwavering strength. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A horizon I built myself, brick by brick, from the dust of what was. The last beams of Brenda's old house splintered, dust settling slowly over the empty lot. Clara stood beside me, her quiet strength a solid presence against the chill. I felt nothing for the collapsing structure, only the crisp autumn air on my face. It marked the end of a long journey, from being discarded at a desolate rest stop to building horizon developments, brick by patient brick. The transformation had been everything, far more profound than any thought of revenge. I had built a life rooted in integrity and purpose, values Brenda never truly understood. The ground beneath us was now clean, ready for the affordable housing project, a tangible symbol of rebuilding for others. I looked at Clara, a slow smile forming on my face. Our relationship, like everything else, had grown steadily, gently. I took her hand, her touch familiar and comforting. Ready to see what we build next, Clara? She squeezed back, her eyes shining with quiet understanding. Always, Ethan. The past was truly behind me, not forgotten, but no longer a burden. I had paid the price of my old naivety, now transforming destruction into new opportunity, shaped by abandonment, betrayal, and self-reliance into a man of quiet, unwavering strength. This was not an end, but a new beginning.